She seduced kings, outsmarted directors, and walked through war zones in heels. Marlene Dietrich didn't just play roles, she rewrote the rules of fame, power, and control. This is the untouchable legend who turned life itself into her greatest performance and made the world believe every frame. Rules meant nothing at 16. Born in 1901 in a small town near Berlin, Marlene Dietrich came into the world under the shadow of authority. Her father was a police lieutenant, strict and upright, the kind of man who believed rules were there to keep chaos out. But he died while Marlene was still a child, and with him went the final say in the house. Her mother took over, raising Marlene with quiet discipline, enrolling her in respectable schools, and trying to shape her into a proper young woman. However, by the time she hit 16, the quiet student had turned into a quiet rebel. It started with rumors, nothing dramatic at first. Classmates whispered that she had bedroom eyes, a phrase that stuck with her long after school. Some teachers called her disruptive, not because she misbehaved, but because she had a way of throwing off balance just by walking into a room. She'd already figured out something most people take years to learn. How you look at someone changes the way they treat you, and she knew how to look. Then came the scandal. Dietrich had begun taking violin lessons seriously enough that her first meaningful affair was with her violin teacher. People found out. The school didn't know how to handle it, but Dietrich did. By the time the scandal settled down, the teacher was gone, but she was still there, unmoved. One professor even lost his job after crossing her, though the exact details were kept quiet. So in a place where students were supposed to blend in, she was impossible to ignore. Music had once been her ticket to the traditional world. She trained diligently, even considered a career as a concert violinist. But that wasn't her real ambition. She didn't want to be a part of culture. She wanted to direct it. Berlin was changing fast, and she could feel the city pulling her in a different direction. The old empire had collapsed, and what replaced it was unstable, noisy, chaotic, and full of opportunity, especially for people who didn't mind bending the rules. Dietrich left the safety of school halls and started drifting toward Berlin's nightlife. At first, she watched from the sidelines. She worked backstage, carried props, ran errands. She wasn't glamorous yet, but she was watching everything. The way singers held a note just long enough to keep the audience in suspense, the way dancers winked at the crowd before spinning away, the way performers dressed to exaggerate or confuse, glitter one night, tailored suits the next. Dietrich didn't just see a show, she saw strategy. She moved from backstage to chorus girl roles and quickly became more than just part of the background. Something about her made people stop mid-drink and pay attention. It wasn't just her face, though, that helped. It was how she carried herself. She didn't flirt the way others did. She didn't giggle or beg for applause. She stood still, stared back, and dared you to look away. Some people found her cold. Others found her magnetic. Either way, she left an impression. The Berlin she stepped into wasn't like other cities. In the early 1920s, it was loud, free, and burning through change like dry wood. The cabaret scene wasn't just a nightlife trend. It was a reaction to everything falling apart. The rules of the old world had collapsed. What came next was experimentation, satire, expression. And Dietrich didn't just fit in. She helped define it. She began playing with her image early. One night she'd arrive in a silk dress, the next in a fitted tuxedo. She wore trousers long before they were fashionable for women and didn't flinch when people talked. In Berlin, things like gender roles, identity, and attraction were flexible, and Dietrich took that freedom seriously. The rumors followed her, but they weren't scandals in Berlin. The city had bars and clubs for every taste, every identity, every mood. Dietrich didn't have to hide who she was, so she didn't. She learned that mystery was more powerful than explanation. The less you gave away, the more people wanted, and people wanted her. Directors, writers, politicians, they'd come to the cabaret for a night of distraction and end up leaving with her name stuck in their head. She wasn't famous yet. She wasn't even considered a major talent. But she had something better, presence, and she was learning how to use it. Her voice, though still untrained, had a smoky, low tone that stood out. Her expressions were subtle, and she moved with a mix of confidence and distance that made it hard to tell where the real woman ended and the act began. Soon, what had started as small roles grew into more featured appearances. By her early 20s, she had a loyal audience in the Berlin club scene. Critics started mentioning her name. One review summed it up with 3 words: legs, legs, legs. But that wasn't the whole picture. Her body got her noticed, but her mind kept her there. She didn't wait for someone to discover her. She was preparing to be seen. Built for the camera, not just the role. And soon one man pulled her from the smoky cabaret to the big screen. Josef von Sternberg was in town, scouting for talent for a film called The Blue Angel. He watched her perform one night and didn't need a second look. The very next morning, he had her called in. Dietrich didn't think much of it. She assumed it was for a minor part. There was barely a line in the script for someone like her. But Sternberg had something else in mind. He cast her as Lola Lola, a cabaret singer who pulls a schoolteacher into ruin with a single glance and a few sharp songs. And Dietrich executed the role perfectly. She smirked, teased, stared directly into the camera like it was a person she knew. She was confident, but more than that, she looked like she knew how the story would end before the audience did. The Blue Angel was a signal. Hollywood was watching and Paramount moved fast. They booked her a one-way trip to America before the movie even premiered in Berlin. She arrived in New York a few days before The Blue Angel opened, a total unknown in America but already branded as a star. By the time the film screened in the US, it didn't matter that she wasn't fluent in English yet. It didn't matter that her accent was thick. People couldn't look away. That's when the real transformation started. Sternberg worked with her on posture, voice control, how to walk, when to pause, where to stand. Lighting became a daily lesson. He taught her where to place her eyes, how to tilt her face so that the shadows deepened in all the right places. It wasn't long before Dietrich began distancing herself from her early career. She publicly denied ever being in silent films, even though she had been. In her mind, real stars didn't start in silence. That space belonged to Garbo or Lillian Gish. She wanted to be remembered for sound, for presence, for talk. So she erased what didn't fit. And for most people, that edit worked. When Morocco hit theaters, it confirmed her transformation. She stepped onto the screen in a tuxedo, sang in a low, calm voice, and kissed a woman on the mouth. That moment traveled faster than the rest of the film. Suddenly, Dietrich wasn't just an actress. She was an idea. No one knew what to expect from her, but everyone watched closely. The image was sharp. It was controlled. It looked effortless, but every part of it was planned. In the Hollywood machine, actors were often boxed in. Women were typecast. But Dietrich resisted that from the start. She didn't beg for more complex roles. She just played her parts in a way that felt like they were written for her and no one else. Even when the dialogue was flat, she held the screen. People didn't always remember what she said. They remembered how she stood still while others moved around her. They remembered her voice, low, slow, like she was telling a secret only you were meant to hear. Paramount positioned her as the studio's answer to Greta Garbo, but Dietrich wasn't looking sideways. She was already thinking long-term. Garbo stayed elusive, silent above it all. Dietrich moved with purpose. She showed up at events, she gave interviews when it helped her image, she shaped her own image in real time. Sternberg and Dietrich kept working together, film after film. Each one built a different side of her image. Sometimes she was mysterious, sometimes dangerous, sometimes glamorous, sometimes cold. But every version of her felt complete. That was the magic. They weren't costumes. They were extensions of the same woman adjusting to new settings. And behind every role, she stayed watchful. She learned how to work the system without ever appearing like she was trying. The camera adored her, and the world followed suit. But while her image was tightly managed on screen, behind the scenes, things were far less staged. Personal life managed like a set. She married Rudolf Sieber in 1923, but it wasn't the kind of love story studios like to sell. They had a daughter, Maria, and for a while they played house. But Dietrich wasn't wired for domestic life. After 5 years, they stopped living together. They didn't fight it out in public or end it with a scandal. They just drifted into separate worlds, quietly. Still, they never divorced. On paper, they remained husband and wife until his death. That paper never got in the way of anything she wanted. She didn't do secrecy. The men in her life came and went, often while cameras were rolling. Actors, writers, musicians. She didn't limit herself. If she felt a connection, she followed it. Sometimes it lasted weeks, sometimes years. She didn't explain these relationships because she didn't think she had to. No press statements, no justifications. People could guess, whisper, speculate. She moved forward either way. When Josef von Sternberg became part of her inner circle, it wasn't just about directing. Their connection stretched past work and into something more personal, more complex. He created her image on screen, but he also became entangled with her off-set. At first, they worked in perfect rhythm. He directed, she delivered. Their movies got darker, sharper, more stylized, and more centered around her. But over time, something shifted. Sternberg was falling deeper into her orbit, while she was branching out, emotionally and professionally. He expected loyalty, but she had her own version of it. She showed up, hit her marks, followed his direction. That was enough for her. But for Sternberg, it wasn't. He started noticing locked dressing room doors. He'd walk by on set and know she was behind them, not alone. The silence became its own answer, and the more he saw it, the more it tore at him. He was building her into a star while losing his grip on the person behind it. She didn't stop seeing other people because it upset him. That kind of reaction wasn't in her script. She made space for whoever she felt drawn to. That sometimes meant castmates. It sometimes meant musicians, directors, or anyone else who caught her attention. And while it raised eyebrows, it didn't damage her career. If anything, it made her more mysterious. On set, the mood could shift depending on who she was seeing at the time. Some productions moved slower. Some directors felt like they had to compete for her focus. But the box office didn't care. Tickets still sold. Reviews still praised her. Her name still carried weight. She didn't chase the spotlight. It moved with her. Eventually, the weight of the relationship with Sternberg cracked. Their final film didn't do well. The chemistry on screen was off. Something had drained out of it. He walked away after that, both from the director's chair and from her life. He couldn't rebuild the version of her he wanted, and she wasn't interested in fixing something she didn't see as broken. When he left, she didn't stall. She stepped back into her routine like nothing had happened. What mattered most to her was control, not of other people, but of her image and her time. She didn't belong to anyone, and she made that clear without needing to say it out loud. With her personal life running on its own terms, she started applying the same control to the world around her, sometimes even stepping into history like it was just another scene to direct. Power games behind palace gates. In 1936, while filming Night Without Armor in England, Marlene Dietrich was living in a country on the edge of royal meltdown. King Edward VIII's romance with Wallis Simpson, an American divorcee, had spiraled into a national scandal. Newspapers were losing their minds. Politicians were preparing for disaster. But Dietrich, she was bored. She didn't care much for politics, but she hated waste, and she thought a king throwing away a crown for a woman wasn't just foolish, it was bad storytelling. So she made a decision. She told Douglas Fairbanks, who was also in London, that she was going to Windsor, not for a tour, not for sightseeing. She told him she was going to save the British monarchy. Her plan, as wild as it sounds, was to show up at Edward's estate, seduce him herself, and steer him back toward his throne. She meant it. Her chauffeur had the engine running. She was halfway to the gates before someone stopped her. They turned her around before she got close, but she never forgot the attempt. To her, it wasn't madness, it was instinct. A woman like her didn't sit on the sidelines while power slipped away. She reached for it, even if it was wearing a crown. And that wasn't just a stunt, it was part of a pattern. Around this time, Dietrich spent long stretches in Antibes on the French Riviera. Her villa wasn't just a retreat, it was her private empire. She didn't live here alone, though. She kept several romantic partners nearby, sometimes all at once, slipping them in and out like acts in a play. One stayed in the main bedroom, another in the guest house, another passing through for lunch. Each partner filled a different role. Some offered admiration, some gave her space, some stayed quiet, and every one of them thought, at least for a moment, that they were the center of her world. That was the trick. Dietrich didn't lie, she just managed perception. If someone got too close, she shifted. If someone got too distant, she pulled them in. No one got everything, and no one noticed the others, unless she wanted them to. But while she was carefully managing her lovers and curating her life, one person wasn't part of the script: her daughter Maria. During those long Riviera summers, Maria was often left in the care of others. At one point, she stayed with one of Dietrich's wealthy female companions. That arrangement, meant to be temporary, would later leave a deep scar, as Maria didn't just feel forgotten. She felt exposed, left alone in a world she didn't understand, without protection, while her mother disappeared into a world of lovers and long lunches by the sea. Dietrich rarely acknowledged discomfort. If something made her uneasy, she erased it. If someone brought up tension, she pivoted. Her strength was emotional control, not just over herself, but over everyone around her. She didn't believe in guilt. She believed in moving forward, and that worked for her. But it didn't work for everyone. Maria would carry the resentment into adulthood, holding on to the feeling that love in Dietrich's world came with terms and conditions, and those conditions didn't always include her. But from Dietrich's point of view, she wasn't cruel. She thought she was creating freedom. She gave her partners freedom to come and go. She gave herself freedom to reinvent. She gave Maria a life of security, education, and privilege. And if that didn't come with daily affection or traditional parenting, she believed the trade-off was fair. Even when people warned her she was juggling too much, she didn't pause. She always believed she could control the outcome if she controlled the setup. That's why she didn't flinch when multiple partners overlapped. That's why she didn't slow down when rumors spread. She trusted her timing, her instinct, her performance. The truth is, she never stayed emotionally present for long. When one phase ended, she simply started the next. Some people called it cold, some called it genius. But for her, it was survival. Staying still meant vulnerability, and vulnerability wasn't something she wore well. By the late 1930s, she had built an entire world that functioned on her terms. Lovers came and went. Friends were kept at a polite distance. Her daughter was part of her life, but not always part of her attention. It wasn't selfishness. It was structure. And for a while, it worked. But the world was shifting again. War was coming. The spotlight was dimming, and Dietrich, always aware of momentum, could feel the shift in her bones. The lifestyle she had built, so carefully balanced, so tightly managed, was about to be tested in ways even she couldn't predict. An unexpected lifeline. By the end of the 1930s, Hollywood was starting to treat Marlene Dietrich like a broken promise. She was still famous, still photographed, still invited to parties, but her name no longer guaranteed ticket sales. One flop followed another. Critics said she was too cold, too European, too stylized. Audiences had changed, and Dietrich, for the first time, felt like the industry was moving without her. Behind closed doors, people started using that phrase every actor dreads: box office poison. She wasn't finished, but she needed a lifeline. That came from the most unexpected place: Universal Pictures, a studio known more for monster movies than high glamour. They handed her a script called Destry Rides Again. It was a Western. It starred James Stewart. It involved saloons, fistfights, and far less eyeliner than she was used to. When she first read the role, she didn't even pretend to be interested. She rolled her eyes. She laughed. This was not the kind of project Marlene Dietrich was supposed to take seriously. But Universal wasn't just offering her a role. They were offering her a reset. She could either hold on to the faded image of a velvet-clad goddess, or she could tear it apart and rebuild something sharper, dirtier, louder. That challenge got her attention, so she said yes. From the second she stepped onto that set, everything changed. Her character, Frenchie, was a rough-talking saloon singer who didn't wait for permission to speak. She brawled with other women, slammed drinks on the bar, and tossed insults like punches. There were no gowns, no butterfly lights, no artful silhouettes. Instead, there were bruises, broken glass, and a stage full of smoke. This wasn't about disappearing into a role. This was about reclaiming her image. She sang songs that didn't try to be pretty. Her voice cracked in places. Her energy was raw, sometimes wild. The elegance people once expected was gone, replaced by something harder to define, but impossible to ignore. The fight scene in the saloon became the heart of it all. Dietrich and her co-star Una Merkel didn't fake it. They refused stunt doubles. They tore into each other for real. Dietrich reportedly told Merkel not to expect a warning. If a punch or a throw was coming, she wasn't going to announce it. She just said, "Watch out," and duck. That was her only advice. The scene was chaotic and real, and it worked. It was one of the most talked about moments in the film. Off-screen, something interesting happened too. She started clicking with James Stewart, her quiet, all-American co-star. He was nothing like the men she usually worked with. No European flair, no tortured artist ego. He was direct, professional, and just curious enough to keep things interesting. Their chemistry made the film stronger, but it also helped Dietrich settle into this new version of herself. She didn't need to float. She could stand her ground and still hold the frame. Audiences loved it. Destry Rides Again became a hit. It reminded people that Dietrich wasn't just a look. She could adapt, swing hard, and win over a new crowd. For critics, it was a surprise. For her, it was strategy. She had studied the industry long enough to know that survival didn't mean staying still. You had to know when to burn the old costume and wear something that made the room stop again. She made the most of every detail. The lighting was harsher, the makeup grittier, the songs less polished. But nothing was careless. Dietrich still had complete control over how she moved, how she sounded, how she landed each scene. The roughness was real, but it was also rehearsed. She knew exactly how much to show and how much to hold back. That balance, that tension between chaos and calculation, is what made it work. For a long time, she'd been boxed into the image of a distant, untouchable figure. This film cracked that box open. She didn't become soft. She became unpredictable. One moment she was dragging someone out of a bar fight. The next, she was sitting at a piano singing about lost chances. The switch between toughness and vulnerability wasn't just acting, it was timing. She didn't overplay either side. She just let both live in the same body and let the audience figure out which one they feared or loved more. Backstage, she kept control too. She approved the angles, reviewed the shots, and helped shape the costume choices. But she wasn't micromanaging out of insecurity. She was building something. This wasn't the return of the old Dietrich. It was a new version that could punch, drink, and still own the room without ever asking for attention. She was no longer boxed in by glamour or elegance. She proved she could move through any genre and still walk away with the spotlight. Studios noticed, directors called, and the audience, who had once turned their back, leaned in again. Dietrich never apologized for her career shift. She didn't do interviews where she explained why she took the role or how it humbled her. She didn't need to. The work spoke for itself. And that was the point. She could transform without explanation. She could get dirty without losing power. And she could survive in an industry that didn't make space for women to age, evolve, or fight back. But just as she was reclaiming her place on screen, the world off-screen was falling apart. And Dietrich wasn't about to sit back while history marched forward. War uniforms and military stages. When World War II broke out, Marlene Dietrich stepped into the middle of it. She'd already become a U.S. citizen, and she wasn't doing it for paperwork. She believed in the fight against Hitler, enough to leave the comfort of studios, red carpets, and satin gowns behind. And once she committed, she didn't go halfway. She joined the war effort not as a poster girl, but as someone who wanted to be right there with the soldiers. The studios could have kept her in Hollywood making propaganda films or running donation drives. But that wasn't her style. She got on a boat, crossed the Atlantic, and started touring with the troops, not from the safety of a fancy hotel in London. She went into the field, tents, mud, smoke, cold, the kind of places where actresses usually don't go. Dietrich didn't wear glitter on these stages. She packed army jackets, utility boots, and a small kit of makeup that she barely used. She didn't need a costume to get attention. Her presence alone pulled the crowd in. She walked into army camps with a voice that didn't need a microphone and a stare that felt more commanding than any officer's salute. She followed military protocol like she belonged there, saluted officers, ate the same food, and traveled in army trucks like any other soldier. She hated being called a USO girl. To her, that sounded like a lounge act. She didn't perform to entertain. She performed to remind the soldiers what they were fighting for. Some nights it was just her and a portable accordion. No spotlight, no orchestra, just a few songs under a tent roof and the sound of boots shuffling in the dirt. Other nights she cracked jokes, told stories, flirted lightly, and stayed after to talk with the men who didn't have anyone else to talk to. She didn't disappear once the music stopped. She sat with soldiers, wrote notes to their families, listened to them describe home. She treated them like people, not just an audience, and they never forgot it. Some troops swore she boosted morale more than any general could. She was glamorous, sure, but also gritty. Not many stars came that close to the front line without flinching. Dietrich lived on rations. She gave up hotel beds and traveled light. She stayed in tents during snowstorms. She kept going even when her voice got tired and her health dipped. When other performers stayed back for safety, she pushed forward. Not to prove a point, but because she felt like she belonged there. She wanted to matter, not as a symbol, but as someone who showed up when it counted. Her relationship with the troops was personal. She didn't just show up, sing, and leave. She stayed longer than she had to. She learned the routines, understood the risks, and never made it about herself. And yet, she became one of the most unforgettable faces of the war effort, not because she asked for attention, but because she earned respect. During this time, she grew close to General James Gaban, one of the youngest and most admired officers in the U.S. Army. Their bond wasn't just rumor, it was real. Gaban was sharp, steady, and serious, and she liked that. Their connection gave her access to places most entertainers never saw. She followed him into high-risk zones, not as a VIP, but as part of the team. Wherever Gaban went, Dietrich wasn't far behind. She didn't just charm her way into these spaces. She earned her place by showing up day after day. For 18 straight months, she toured with troops across North Africa, Italy, France, and Germany. She sang in makeshift camps, old barns, and bombed-out buildings. She marched, waited, and adapted to the rhythm of war. And she never asked for special treatment. By the time the war ended, Dietrich had become more than a star. She was a soldier in her own right, even if she didn't wear rank. She'd built a reputation not just for courage, but for consistency. When she finally returned to Paris, the applause sounded different. It wasn't just for her voice or her face. It was for everything she'd just done. And that version of Marlene Dietrich, the one who faced down war with lipstick in her pocket and steel in her posture, wasn't a character. It was the real thing. Paris affairs and the one she lost. But this time, Paris wasn't just a stop. It became the backdrop for something she hadn't really experienced before, the feeling of wanting to stay still, not for the spotlight, not for strategy, for someone. That someone was Jean Gaban. He was already a star in France. Not a glittering, delicate kind of star. Gaban was solid, grounded, the kind of man who didn't chase attention but got it anyway. He had none of the Hollywood gloss she was used to. He didn't play games. He didn't flatter. And that's exactly what made him so magnetic to her. Dietrich was used to bending people. Gaban didn't bend. They started spending time together. She cooked for him. She made space for him in her daily routine, which for Dietrich was rare. Normally, people adjusted to her pace, not the other way around. But with Gaban, something shifted. She let herself soften, not in public, but in the way she stayed a little longer after dinner, in the way she listened instead of directing the conversation. He didn't need her to perform. He wanted her to be present. And for a while, she tried. But the past doesn't disappear just because the location changes. While she was building something steady with Gaban, she hadn't fully stepped out of her old life. General James Gaban, the American officer she'd grown close to during the war, was still in her orbit. Their connection had never been casual, and it didn't stop just because peace was declared. Dietrich was used to juggling relationships. She thought she could manage both. She always had before. But Gaban found out, and when he did, he didn't yell. He didn't break things. He simply left. No second chances, no drawn-out fight, just a clean, quiet exit. And that silence hit harder than any argument ever could. Because for the first time, Dietrich had been the one left behind. She tried to fix it. She called. She visited. She sent letters. She showed up at his apartment more than once. But Gaban wasn't interested in second takes. Losing Gaban cut deeper than she expected. It wasn't just the loss of a man she loved. It was the realization that for once, charm, loyalty, even love weren't enough. She had always assumed she could hold both freedom and connection in the same hand. But this time, one pushed the other out. Paris, which had always felt like a playground, turned cold after that. She didn't make a dramatic exit. She just left, quietly. without announcements. And once she was gone, she didn't talk much about it. When she returned to Hollywood, something in her had shifted. The sharpness was still there, but the noise around her had softened. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She wasn't chasing the next big headline. For once, she wasn't even interested in being seen. She worked when it made sense. She kept her circle small, and she rarely spoke about what had happened in Paris. She still had admirers. She still had affairs. But the weight of them changed. Nothing lasted long. Nothing ran deep. It wasn't bitterness. It was adjustment. She went back to being the version of herself that was easier to manage, untouchable, admired, slightly out of reach. It was safer, cleaner, quieter. This chapter didn't break her, but it did leave a mark. And unlike her usual pattern, she didn't try to cover it up. She just moved on. Stage lights and hidden bruises. By 1953, Marlene Dietrich had been through war zones, film sets, broken hearts, and fading studio deals. But nothing prepared her for what happened when she stepped onto a Las Vegas stage. This wasn't a film with second takes or clever edits. This was a live audience every night waiting to be impressed or disappointed. Her first appearance was at the Sahara Hotel. The crowd wasn't there for nuance. They wanted spectacle, glamour, something larger than life, so she gave it to them, but in her own way. She walked out in a shimmering gown that looked like it was barely hanging on, but in reality it was an engineering masterpiece. Every bead, every stitch was planned for movement, light reflection, and structure. From a distance, it looked fragile. Up close it was armor. The gowns became part of the myth. They showed skin without ever revealing anything. They sparkled under hot lights, but were reinforced with invisible panels, strategic netting, and corsetry so tight it could hold a stage pose through a 5-minute standing ovation. She called them illusion dresses, and they worked. Every audience member walked away thinking they'd seen something daring, when in fact they'd only seen what she allowed. Behind the curtain, it was a different story. Dietrich didn't travel light. She brought trunks packed with her own soaps, cleaning products, light bulbs, and even toilet seats. Before every show, she would personally inspect and scrub her dressing room. It wasn't a diva act. It was habit. She needed order. She needed control. If something felt out of place backstage, it threw off the rhythm, and rhythm was everything. But that level of control came at a price. Touring was punishing. Her body wasn't built for the constant travel, nightly performances, and pressure to look flawless under 10 pounds of sequins. The gowns got heavier. The makeup took longer to apply, and the stage, once a place of reinvention, started to feel more like a cage. Dietrich began to rely on small rituals to get through each night. A drink before curtain, a specific brand of cigarettes between numbers. She told herself it helped with the nerves or the voice, but over time it became a system she couldn't perform without. Her stamina dropped. Her voice, once smoky and magnetic, sometimes cracked, but she never showed panic. If something slipped, she slipped with it, gracefully like she meant to. The audience never saw the strain. They saw the gowns. They heard the voice. They felt the presence. That was the illusion she maintained. The stage was hers, but the cost was starting to show backstage. Her legs began to swell. Her knees ached. Sometimes she had to be lifted into her dress because bending was too painful. But when the lights came on, none of that mattered. She walked out like she had diamonds in her spine. She kept touring. London, Berlin, New York. Theaters sold out in advance. Reviewers praised her presence, her mystery, her discipline. No one talked about the bandages under her dress or the hours she spent lying flat between shows. No one knew how many times she nearly collapsed after curtain call. She wouldn't let them see it. Final years, silence, phones, and curtains. And then in the 1970s, after decades of reinvention, applause, and control, Marlene Dietrich made her final transformation into silence. She didn't announce her retirement. There was no farewell concert, no dramatic goodbye. She simply stopped showing up. One day she was everywhere. The next she wasn't. The legend went quiet. She moved into a Paris apartment tucked behind drawn curtains and layers of privacy. For the last 12 years of her life, she lived almost entirely from her bed. Her phone was her lifeline. She stayed connected to the world through voices, not faces. Friends, journalists, even fans. Some were surprised to get a call from her. Others were surprised she picked up, but she still talked like herself. She could recall names, dates, jokes, film scenes, and people's worst behavior. She just didn't want to be seen anymore. This wasn't about vanity. It wasn't about being old. It was about control. She had spent her entire life mastering the art of how she appeared. On stage, on screen, even in real life. She had shaped every frame, every moment. So when her body no longer matched the image she'd created, she refused to let it be part of the story. She turned away every offer to appear on camera. Directors begged her to do cameos. Interviewers promised gentle questions. Fashion houses offered tributes. She said no to all of them. Even when documentaries about her were made, she agreed to voice recordings but not video. She was no longer interested in keeping up with anyone else's version of her. The Dietrich the world knew, flawless, cool, unshakable, was the one she intended to protect. And she did, right to the end. Her daughter, Maria, handled most of the outside communication. Friends came to Paris and stayed in nearby hotels, hoping to be invited up. Sometimes Dietrich would call them instead and talk for hours, never suggesting a visit. She kept the conversations light when she wanted, deep when she felt safe, but the boundary stayed firm. Behind those closed doors, her body was failing. She had lived through falls, injuries, surgeries, some from years of physical performance, others from the toll of life on the road. There were days when she couldn't walk across the room. Her leg had been permanently damaged in a stage fall. She was in pain often, but no one saw her struggle. That was the rule. But then, in 1992, she died in her apartment at the age of 90. Her coffin was flown back to Berlin. That choice surprised some people. She hadn't lived there for decades, but Berlin was still hers, in a way no other city had been. It was where she learned how to perform, how to rebel, how to disappear. She was buried near her mother. No spotlight, no fanfare, just a return to the place that first taught her how to become someone unforgettable. So, what are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments down below.